And then Jesus took the tablecloth and divided it amongst the disciples, saying, "This is my skin. Take and clad yourselves in it in remembrance of me." So this is a kind of a special episode. Props and thanks to at Misplaced Faith on Twitter for the tweet that kind of sparked this topic. Today we're going to be discussing a claim that the Mormon Church may not have, that the Mesoamerican God, the Feathered Serpent, known to the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, was in fact Jesus. And before we get any further into this, I'm going to give some disclaimers. One, I was never a Mormon. I was never a member of the Church of the Latter-day Saints, so this is a subject that could very much be better covered by an ex-Mormon. So there is that. However, while I am not, while I don't have any sort of degrees in history or, mythological studies, what have you, I am kind of a nerd when it comes to what we can know about Mesoamerican mythology. When I'd visited the British Museum, I did make a point to visit their one room on Mesoamerica. So take everything with, a big old chunk of salt, and everything that I'm using as a source, including the instigating tweet, will be placed in the description below. Excuse the hissing breaths and such. I've got a touch of a cold, so I'm doing my best to try and take care of that, trying to mitigate that as good as possible and hopefully nip it in the bud. But it will likely affect the audio quality. So without further ado, let's get started on this. Now, from what I've read, it seems that this is it's a controversial topic, at least nowadays. The only official articles and such that show that the church itself supports this apologetic dates back to the late 90s, and I did come across a few articles more recently that go about debunking it, and they're articles written by Mormons. So there is that. However, that being said, where's the fun? Where's the fun in that? So, but it looks to me, at least in my opinion, from what I've read in the past few days, that it's debated apologetic, and possibly on the level of something of like a vestigial doctrine, or an urban legend, if you will. So without further ado, let's get into this. Now, we're going to start with a quick overview of who exactly the Feathered Serpent is. But anyways, Feathered Serpent. So from what we can tell, or the Feathered Serpent as a deity can date back to at least, it's quite a wide date range for what we think could have been the first emergence of the Feathered Serpent as a god. And the Mesoamerican cultures, specifically the Olmecs, the Mayans, and later on the Aztecs. And this range for the first appearance or whatever is like as possibly as early as 1300 BC/BCE to 3 to 400 BC/BCE. So the timing right there is a problem. Quetzalcoatl is what the Feathered Serpent was known to the Aztecs as. Other cultures had different names for it, but the Feathered Serpent did see like it. There were a bunch of pretty much all of these names for this Feathered Serpent figure did somewhat describe a singular, deity that, moved from, I think the earliest site is in Guatemala, up through the region, up into the, southern U.S., northern Mexico, Aztec Empire area. I'm very much under the belief that, yes, the Feathered Serpent was, one deity whose religion just kind of spread throughout the area. And excuse me for using the bad meme of bringing up Ishtar in a video about Jesus, but I kind of see the Feathered Serpent as kind of like the Ishtar of Mesoamerica in terms of influence, not in terms of actual attributes. So the Feathered Serpent was a wind god, a god of the wind and the earth, that it's associated with magic, with knowledge, with who supposedly created writing. There are myths about the Feathered Serpent helping create humanity by tricking the lords of the underworld and bringing the bones of all the humanity that had died in the previous world up from the underworld to be resurrected. Which you could argue is somewhat of a parallel, but it's a bad somewhat of a parallel to Jesus, but it is a bad one. And there are a lot of issues with drawing parallels between the Feathered Serpent and Jesus that I will go into later. So, and particularly to the Aztecs, the Feathered Serpent was one of not a trio, but a quadro, or whatever the word would be, of four somewhat co-equal gods from my rudimentary understanding. I cannot stress this enough. I'm just some nerd. I've not done any kind of formal study on this. This is literally just me regurgitating what I've kind of collated. So, each of these four gods was also associated with a color and a cardinal direction. Quetzalcoatl was associated with the south and with the color white. And from what I can see, the color white being associated with Quetzalcoatl is more about him kind of being in the balance and opposition to Tezcatlipoca, and forgive me if I'm butchering these names, who's the like the god of death and the underworld. So, and then for the east and the west, you have Huitzilopochtli, the sun god, and Xipe Totec, who's actually gonna play a pretty interesting role later on in this video. But he's the god of the agricultural god of resurrection. So, you know, we have our characters, and now, but so basically, Feathered Serpent was one of the most widely worshipped deities in Mesoamerica, if not the most widely worshipped deity in Mesoamerica, and had been worshipped for centuries, possibly even a millennia, before, you know, the birth of Christ, and was, you know, worshipped as a deity, you know, until no one expects the Spanish Inquisition to come curb stomping all over your empire and extinguishing your religion, which kind of segues into one of the problems with these comparisons between Quetzalcoatl and Jesus, is a lot of our sources, you know, a lot of our sources for their actual mythology, aside from like archaeological digs and, you know, carvings and art, you know, a lot of our literature about their mythology is filtered through the Spanish, who were at the time currently genociding the heck out of the Aztecs and doing their best to crush everything that wasn't Catholic about their religion. So a lot of these, you know, parallels can also be seen as a sort of latent Christianity, you know, a Christian influence, in similar to the ways that a lot of Celtic mythology from the British Isles were filtered through Christian monks. You know, you see a lot of biblical allusions in Beowulf, for example. And so, and they do bring that, you know, this myth about a king who had left and then promised to return. There are two myths about this king who had Quetzalcoatl as one of his titles. One that he sacrificed himself on a pyre and then ascended into the sky and became the planet Venus. And then there's another that he sailed off into the Atlantic on a raft of snakes and reads, which is metal as hell, which is kind of par for the course for Mesoamerican mythology, which is kind of why I love it so much. But that myth about him sailing off into the Atlantic, promising to return in a year of the one reed, is kind of led to the warm welcome the Aztecs gave Hernan Cortez when he landed on, when he landed, because he landed in a year of the one reed, and so they thought that he was a representative of Quetzalcoatl, and like I said, this is all like encyclopedia article level regurgitation. So, and there's also the problem is Yahweh has a thing about snakes. The whole snake in the garden. I did see that they try to use the snake as a pole on the pole as an argument in support of why Quetzalcoatl could be Jesus. And I'm like, yeah, that was literally just a case of snake bite. And it's usually a post hoc, allusion. So, once again, it is used in sermons as an allusion to Jesus, but usually as a post hoc allusion. And it's more that the fact that the snake was put on a pole than the snake itself. And actually, the allusion to Jesus that's more pointed to, at least in the sect, in the Pentecostal sect that I grew up in, was the serpent will bruise the heel of the seed of the woman, but the seed of the woman will crush the serpent's head with his heel. So, Yahweh doesn't really have a very good thing about snakes unless it's like, used to punish people or just, unless it has to do with showing off his own trouser snake as in a paraphrase of what how Godless Engineer would put it. And so, and aside from all that, any other kind of allusions are very vague, especially since, Quetzalcoatl is seen as a bringer of rain, and as far as I know, the only time Jesus made it rain was when he was busting up the temple, and that's not exactly it's not in the same connotation. But and I know that it, like, from what I know that it's kind of part of Mormon doctrine that Jesus, did show up to the Americas to preach. But I mean, if you've really got to tie Jesus to a Mesoamerican God, and I'm gonna do a little bit of help here, and kind of allude back to my opening. If you're gonna tie Jesus to a Mesoamerican God, then why go with the feathered serpent when the flayed god, Xipe Totec, is right fucking there? He's, he's a, he's a god of resurrection. The flaying, could be, called an allusion to the whips and such that Jesus had, suffered before being crucified. I forget which gospel said it, but there is a verse that said he wasn't even recognizable as a man. And I know this is more me having fun than anything else. And but so I will say this, like, looking and you know interesting that agricultural societies have put what's the word, put importance on themes of rebirth and resurrection. I wonder why. So, like, even then, with the flayed man, whose animal, because each of the gods had an animal counterpart. Quetzalcoatl is a feathered serpent. The flayed man, is his animal counterpart is the jaguar, which you could say is an allusion to Jesus being called the Lion of Judah. Like I said, I'm just having fun with this concept because, seriously, you can kind of twist anything to make it look like anything, especially with the very vague commonalities we're working with. And once again, any vague commonalities that aren't a result of being filtered through the fucking Spanish conquistadors, because fuck them. But this has been a trip. I had fun. I hope you guys had fun. Go ahead, like, share, subscribe, leave a comment if you enjoyed this. I might do some reading and take a look into other myths of, like, other thoughts about Jesus, like, traipsing around the world, because there are a couple myths about him supposedly popping up in other locations. Like, for instance, I think there's one about him chatting with the Druids in Ireland. And then, of course, there's the poem Jerusalem, which really should be the national anthem of the UK. What the fuck were you thinking when you went with God Save the Queen? Just saying. But with all that aside, this whole spiel kind of goes to show that indoctrination is a hell of a drug. You have a good day.